So, so the topic for today is just thinking about, those classes that we talked about, our processes. What is our process for creating classes? So going from just the idea or, you know, the the beginning of, hey, we're thinking about this type of topic. What can you do to how do you design those topics, putting together stuff, your mindset for putting those things together and presenting it. So just going through the whole life cycle. So, if you're ready to start, Tiff, I mean, just talk to us about your process when you get an email or a phone call from a vendor. Hey, Tiff, we were looking for you to teach a class on this. What do you think? And where do you go from there?
My first question is always centered around what happened, or what are you trying to change, or what do you want to be different? That's usually where it starts. Like, what happened? Because most training, especially for the types of training that I do, I don't do a lot of like technical training anymore, like program this or program that. I do really a lot just of workplace stuff, and so almost every time that there's like a training, it's because something happened or there was the incident. And so because there was that one incident, they want to educate everybody else. And so when it's not like the incident, sometimes it's just trends. We're noticing that. And so I think that's my always my first question. Like, what do you want people to know, or what do you want them to do different if they do this training? And that's usually the starting point. And so as I listen to the story of the incident or the trends or what they're noticing, then as they start to talk about those challenges, what I'm thinking about are what models connect with that. What information do I have? What research is available? What are some of the evidence-based practices? What visual can I give that would put this into a context? That's where my brain is going as I'm listening to the story. It's like understanding what the catalyst is, and then thinking about how does that apply to knowledge. Or if I don't, I can't connect it to something, I make notes so I can do some research. That's where I start. Like, what about you?
Yeah, when I get that exploratory email, and sometimes it's very specific. I'm like, okay, you want something specifically, or just kind of a general topic. I still want to, like you mentioned, get a better perspective. So I really do value those needs calls if we have them, or if there isn't something set up for a needs call, I'll want more information from the programmer. So what is it specifically they're looking for? Like you said, is it based off a specific incident, or is it just something that's a general training topic, right? What is it that they'd like people to develop? And so I definitely try to do a needs assessment. I prefer to do a needs assessment, you know, um, in a real time format, phone call, Zoom. Most of them are Zoom these days,
Mhm.
but like you mentioned, I mean, we have tons of models, we have tons of training modules that we can put together, but they don't always, apply to everybody that we train. I mean, I train a lot of, you know, um, welfare to work folks, but I also train a lot of folks from eligibility, which is a different mindset and a different skill set. I train supervisors, I train, child welfare social workers, I train adult protective services social workers, auditors. I work for banks, so I teach customer service to tellers, to customer service managers, to executives and state employees, right? And so not everything is going to work exactly in the same way. So, like you said, a specific example, give me, history. When I'm asked to do keynotes, okay, so what specifically does your organization do? What is it that you're looking to see happen? Right? It's a coaching question. What would you like to see happen? What would you like to see accomplished? Right? So, like you said, what is the goal of the training? Where does it originate from? Right? And so, and also, one of the questions I like to ask is what previous trainings have you had on the topic, right? Or something that was similar. And so, just so I'm not redundant, right? And to something else maybe they had 6 months ago. And because
Hmm.
I can train the same topic because I'm pretty sure that the way that I present it comes at a different perspective than somebody else. I'm sure you're the same person where, because we really, I think one thing we both have in common is we really ground our trainings and our models in reality,
Hmm.
right? So we
Yeah.
can talk about the model, we can talk about the theory, but what does this mean to you? How do you apply it, right? It's great to talk about, you know, what the model is and where it came from and what it looks like, but how does this apply to you? How does this affect you? I mean, if you don't feel like this is something that you could use or that relates to you, then basically you're just sitting there collecting dust. And I'm like you, I when I was working for the county, I went through some great trainings, and I went through some trainings that, you know, um, I was like, damn, I drove an hour down the mountain for this.
Hmm.
And I wasn't alone. I had one of my coworkers, rest in peace, he passed away earlier this year. He stood up in the middle of a class with Lisa Marie, if you remember her, and he said, "What are you going to tell me that I haven't already heard for the last 30 years?" Right. And Lisa Marie was super gracious about it and, explained it in a way she didn't get defensive about it and just, well, I mean, there's no new topics under the sun. There's a different way of presenting it or ways that we can go through it that hopefully you'll get some value out. And I've had that happen to me maybe 3 times. And really just I learned from her. That was a great way of answering that. And at the end of the class, I generally tend to look at that person and say, how did I do? So, those, so just recognizing what the need is, where it's coming from, what is was there an incident, that started this? Like I said, in Fresno County, there's a specific incident. In other counties, there's been specific incidents that have, created this, I don't want to say knee-jerk reaction, but really created this sense of urgency to address the topic. And so that, I start formulating my thoughts on models, and so it's one thing to have all your models, but I wanted to see, you know, with my models and with my information, I can just put it in there. And I've seen some trainers that just put it in there and just teach you models and teach you and go through activities. But for me, it's really important to tell a story. You mentioned Teresita. She was a good storyteller. I think that's my strength as a trainer is telling stories. And so I generally have a story for most of the topics, most of the models, whether it's my own personal story or a story I've learned through how many years of training professionals or something I've read in an article or anything else like that. And then I generally have videos, that I will have to support that as well. And so I really want to create a flow, right? A flow of telling the story, going through the agenda and making sure the story connects throughout the entire process, even if it's a couple different topics. I mean, you know, uh, our friend Nora, she was teaching a class for me when I was out, and she said, resilience and accountability. Who came up with that title? She goes, was that a county thing? And I said, well, yeah. I said it was something that they wanted to do, and we recognized that they wanted half day trainings on those, but then we talked about maybe integrating those and how important that is. I mean, the more accountable you are to each other, the more resilient you are because now you have support through your team. So how do we, weave that story through maybe the topics and create a red thread that connects all of the topics, right? And so that's been, something that I've tried to do. And then I have people that I work with that, literally the idea of the red thread. We need a red thread. Oh, cool. I do that already. Yeah, let's do that. So, what's your process on creating those outlines and those flows?
I think I try to just think about the topic, um, think about the audience, think about how much time I have. I definitely don't want to do all of the talking, but I also am like you, I'm a storyteller. And again, depending on the audiences, I use a lot of like my family as the subject matter because I think I can make the point without always bringing it to work. Because again, a lot of the things I'm teaching are just on the human condition. It's not necessarily related just to the workplace. It's about being a human being. And so, um, and given that I'm a life and leadership coach, that you can access at www.givingthegiftcoaching.com. I haven't done that in a long time, so I thought it would be a great a great opportunity. But because I don't really think that people have a separate personal and professional life. I know that we have different roles we play in each of them, but I think like if I focus on whole person wellness, then in whole person skill sets, that to me that's more effective. So um I really do think about the needs of the audience and what they do and what their feelings are about the topic, and then what would be meaningful for them, right? I don't want to come in and say your manager said that you all are a bunch of yahoos and you need to learn how to talk to each other. Like most people don't respond to stuff like that. So I really think about like if I was in their position, like what would I want to know? What would I care about? What would be helpful to me? What would change my day to day? What would have a positive impact? So I think about those things, and then I don't always think about the stories. The stories just come naturally because I'm a storyteller. So I don't really pre-plan my stories. A lot of times they just come out of like there's something that happened that I can share that connects. And I think the other part of how I train, and this is part of like why keeping it real is such a real part of it, is that I've really had a lot of development and a lot of support in the last 30 years, I guess, of being a grown up. Gosh, have I been a grown up for 30 years already? Maybe I'm giving myself too much time. Maybe 25 years, maybe. But it's been a long time that I've been a grown up. So,
I've been a grown up for 10 years, so yeah.
gosh, but I've had so many like lessons learned, and I think that's kind of like where I come from. It is how can I help with like my lessons learned and put it into a perspective that's meaningful and is focused on growth, like focused on you can be bad at stuff. Let me tell you all the ways I've been bad at stuff. And I think that's like one of my best stories is how I've gotten it wrong over the years. Like I'm real vulnerable with all of the ways that I've gotten it wrong and why I know that this new thing that I'm telling you is the better way. Because here's all the ways it's been handled in the past that didn't get good outcomes. And here's what I do now in the good outcomes. And so people resonate, I think, a lot with that because I do, again, tell lots of stories about my kids and my family, that resonates with people as well because they also have kids and family. Not everybody does, but a lot of people can connect with like if you can do this, practice this with the people that you love, imagine what it's going to be like for, people that maybe you're not emotionally connected to and how helpful it can be. So I think about them. I think about the stories like in the moment. I'm very thoughtful about like thought-provoking questions. I definitely and I it's funny because I didn't even realize that I did this, that this was what it was, the coach approach. But I have incorporated reflective questions into almost every single training I've done since I started training, and I didn't even realize how why I was doing it. I just knew it to me it worked. And I don't want to just sit here and tell people stuff because it's just my perspective or my experience, but life is so much bigger than my perspective and my experience. And so I might say it's like this is how I've experienced it. And now what about you? What have you noticed? What have you gone through? What have you tried? How could you apply this skill to your work? um, just a lot of reflective questions where they can think about it by themselves. They can talk about it as a group. I always give people that opportunity in class. Like, if you prefer to just answer the question in your workbook or turn to someone around who looks smart or interesting or funny or, I always make up weird adjectives for them and talk about it. And so that coach approach is something I think I've done for a long time. I do it intentionally now, but it's always been part of my training style. But honestly, I thread things together. I don't know if I put as much thought. I think it's just intuitive at this point. I'm like, this is what I need to do. It's kind of like the unconscious, what is it called? Unconscious competence here at this point. I just
Yeah.
kind of do it. And then as I train, especially like you can have in your mind like how it's going to go, and then you do it. And then this is one of the things I do put into my plan is a bit of flexibility. And so I'm famous for the free gifts with purchase. That's what I call it when I'm like, okay, hold on. So now that we're talking about this, and now that you brought this up, let me show you a different model. Let me put this into some context and let me show you a theory or something. And this is what the studies show, and this is what is very predictable behavior, and here's how it's connected to this. Like, what do you think about that? And I just love that organic sense of let's just have a conversation. So even though again we have to plan for content, we have to plan for delivery and keep that thread going, I think the way that I just approach training is like, let's have a conversation and I'll share with you some of my stuff and I want to hear about some of your stuff. And then we're going to figure out what stuff we're going to do for the future. That's, I haven't really thought about that. Carl, thank you for that. So now that's now all my secrets are out. I just go and try to have conversation and keep it real, by the way, and just keep it real.
So for me to do that, it has to be intentional for me.
Yeah.
I'm like you. I things will come up in the midst of a conversation, in the midst of a class. Someone asks a question, and I have mental resources to tell stories that relate to it. Just because it is unconscious competence, and I don't even think about them; they just happen. And I'm really fortunate to be able to do that.
Mhm.
Um, but when I create a class, I write down an outline. I type out an outline specifically, um, how long I'm going to talk about this topic.
Mhm.
What are the activities? You know, what are we going the description, the introduction, a supporting video, maybe a story. And then I have some, like I said, some extemporaneous stories. I have some canned stories. I have some stories that maybe are canned from another class that, like you said, when it comes up, it's a bonus, right? Those things
Mhm.
like that. But then also I'll have a video, and it really helps, especially with the format that we do for one of our employers, where they want that outline, and just so if people do train our stuff, then they have an understanding of what our flow looks like, right? And so it helps me to write it out because otherwise it's all jumbled in my head. And like I said, I chase squirrels all day.
Mhm.
And there's many, many times where I'll put together an outline based off of how I think I'm going to present it and the flow and what people can use. And then I get in the midst of it and I said, oh, actually, we should move this further up. And or we should replace this model with this model. This would be more appropriate in this place. So it's a trial and error thing, especially when I first present something. But the whole process, being an introvert, not being someone who likes to just talk off the cuff, unless I'm in the midst of a conversation. I'm not an instigator of a conversation. I don't usually initiate conversations, what makes it hard. Pickup lines have always been the hardest thing for me as a kid. I didn't know what to say or how to say it. Or if you meet someone, special, meet someone famous, I'm one of those people. Hi, it's nice to meet you. And I'm like, oh, damn, I should have said, I love your work, or blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I go back and think about all the stuff I could have said. When I know some people who just are able to, the minute they see somebody, they always have the right thing to say. That's not me, right? Yeah, that's you. That's not me, right? So I have to do it more intentionally in a linear fashion. It's not a word cloud. I have, topic number one, A, B, C, sub one, video, debrief, right? So that gives me some type of structure. Do I always follow the structure? No, but it gives me a plan that I can color within the lines, right?
Well,
And
I
so
do do
that's,
that. Mhm.
yeah, but that's something that I need to do, right? To be able to keep me focused, keep me on task and on point, and to initiate conversations, I need to have that in front of me. When I teach a class, I have a printout of my slides, and it's a 3 page, yeah, it's a 3 page, the 3 slide page, and I do a double-sided, and I just have it in front of me. Even if I've taught the class a million times, it's always good to remember to go back because we teach so many different topics. It's always good to go back and I have little notes that I wrote, and I don't write full notes. The first time I teach it, I write full notes. We need this, or we talk about this and this and that. And by the time it's refined, if I have to revisit the class or re-edit the class, if I print it out again, I don't really need those notes as much as I need maybe one or two words to help me story, video, break. I always write down the breaks,
Yeah.
right? So just yeah, but that's where we are different in that I have to be able to have that. Just it gives me peace of mind. Otherwise, I get anxious, and because sometimes I start talking um and go off not off topic, but I take a tangent and start talking about stuff. If I have the notes in front of me, I know if that's a topic we're going to revisit later, I don't want to talk too much about it now. And if I do talk too much about it now, then maybe I just kind of reference it later, but I don't want to spoil stuff. So I always have my notes there. I go over them the night before every class. I don't care if it's, the customer service class I've taught 1,000 times. I look at it and just for some reason it just imprints in my mind. I go to sleep and I have peace of mind, and I wake up and I'm ready to go. So it's very, very detailed, very linear, right? I'm an S, so I'm an introvert, um, and so I really like that internal processing. And just to be prepared, when I'm prepared, then it's better for me. It's better for me to be prepared so that I can be flexible in the midst of the preparation. I have a friend, kind of reminds me of you, and we were colleagues when we both worked at the bank. And I say, you know what? All I need is a box. Just give me a box. Tell me what the parameters are, what the expectations are, what you're looking for, and then let me color within the lines. And she said, "Oh, that's cool. I just want to blow the box up. I don't want a box. I just
Yeah.
want to be able to."
Your
Right.
box.
So kind of reminds me, right? So those are differences in our styles where we're both relationship focused, right? You're an I, I'm an S. You're probably an ENFP, right? In Myers-Briggs, and I'm an ISFP, right? And so we have similar things. It's just that S in the end. The S, we need structure, we need linear. Okay, you want me to do this, you want me to do this, and then you want me to talk to so and so, you want me to send this to them, and you want this by then. Is that what I'm hearing? Whereas, the ends are just like, okay, so what is it you want? Okay, so what does it look like? Like that? Okay, I got it. No worries. Don't have to tell me anything else, right? That's the biggest difference between the two, right? So I recognize that I need that linear. So I tell people, yeah, you know what? Sure, I'm a PhD, but if you want me to do something exactly the way that you want it done, talk to me as if I'm a second grader. Lay it out for me, man. I need that. Right. So that's my process too. I mean, just the notes that I wrote, for this class or for this topic, just talking about how we design the class and then how we present it, right? So just so that I know that I'm here, so I'm not jumping around and missing points, because those
So,
squirrels in my head are real.
so when you share that, I do plan,
Mhm,
but
mhm,
not as detailed as you because I
right.
always start with an outline. And I actually started with an outline before we had to have outlines because
Sure.
I have to plan and it's very my outlines are not detailed like yours, but it really is okay. Intro, what do I like? What icebreaker? How do I want to kick it off? Like what's going to get people invested? And then what's the main idea? Couple topics. I start. Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me rewind because I'm getting really excited. I love by the way development. I love development. It's one of um I love delivering training, but I love developing training even more. I get so much thrill out of designing and being creative. It's like what inspires me. So anyways, I always start with the class description and the learning objectives. If I have those, everything will be centered around those. So that's where I start. The second thing that I'd like to do is the outline. So again, what models am I going to use? How are we going to connect this back to the audience? And what can they do to have an experience with it? Whether it be a discussion question, an activity, a practice, a video, but like how can I get them to personalize it to them. So that's what I'm thinking about. So what's the topic? How does this apply to the audience? What do I want them to do with it? Almost like the what, the so what, the now what with a little what incorporated in Just just so you know, that's usually how my mind works. So once I have the outline, then I develop the handout. This is where I do research. This is where I find, again, I put the models in with the explanations. I put the questions that I'm going to ask, especially thinking about my S's and C's who sometimes want to see the question before I ask the question. So I might be like, we're going to talk about this model. And at the end, I'm going to ask you this. So as we're talking about, be thinking about like how this applies to you. And so I do that. And then once I have my handout written, then I go in and I do my PowerPoint. And my PowerPoints are always very simple. You've taught some of my classes. There's not a ton of content on them. I am not a fan of walking into a classroom and seeing full sentences on a PowerPoint. It makes me want to break a window. So I don't train like that. Not, I know nobody get all crazy. I know that there's value and some people love it that way, and that's your perspective. You can be right as well. I personally am not a fan. But if that's what you, if that works well for you, then do that, you know. But, and not but, um, and then I do my PowerPoint. Most of my PowerPoints, it's really just a place like to tell me where we're at and what we're on. And I always put the activity instructions and the questions up on the PowerPoint so people know exactly what I'm asking. So those are kind of like how I plan. And then I think because I've been doing this for so long, I've been training for over 2 decades, that now the timing of it, for whatever reason, just always works out for me. Like I've got it down where I'm not like I don't want to say I'm not intentional about it, but I don't always consciously think about timing. It just tends to work out now. So I'm like, do I have a half day? Do I have a full day? If I have a half day, I can get through this. If I have a full day, I can get through that. And that's kind of how I plan. And lucky for me, with a few exceptions, like that communications class that needs to be 2 days, I can make it work in the time that I have without necessarily rushing. But I also purposely put at the end of the class something that maybe doesn't need to be talked about in class, but they can have a resource for it later. So if I am like, we probably won't get to this last learning point, and it's in the handout. So I know you all know how to read by yourselves. And so if we don't get to it, I want you to know you have a resource that you can, and there's some reflection questions that you can engage with it. So I kind of set it up like that to, especially for a class I've never done before and I don't know yet, there's always kind of an out at the end in case we don't get to it. So
Yeah, I do the same. And also sometimes it helps, especially if you're doing a half day version of a full day class.
yeah,
I'll put stuff in there. Like the class I did for Montana for a bank up in Montana, we did Myers-Briggs and we went through it was a half day. It was 3 hours actually. And so we went through just their reports and the validation process you have to do when you're certified in Myers-Briggs and some of the activities that help kind of cement the cognitive functions. And I said, so I know this seems abrupt, but just think about how this affects you.
mhm,
And we do a flexing your style display. And I said, we'll learn more about flexing your style. I have other classes that hopefully we will be able to do on how Myers-Briggs affects your conflict management, how it affects your team management, how it affects your stress management. And so those are things that we'll talk about in future classes. Just kind of giving them, you ever seen the begin, you ever watch a TV series and after the first episode it says, now, what's going to happen
right,
this
right,
this season, right? And it
yeah,
shows you all
yeah,
the different highlights. And you're like, oh shit, when did the car blow up, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
just letting them know this is what to expect if it's if like I said, if it's a full day content, so there's more to this. We have a full day version of this class, if you're interested in it when we're able to do those things, right? Just so people are, you know, they're aware. And, like I said, a lot of times classes generate from, hey, that was a good class, and they go to SAP development. Tiff talked about this, but she said, she has more about it and it's a different class. So, can we maybe have that? I've had some classes happen because of that, right? With my different vendors. So yeah, just and always, at the end, like the extra content, the bonus content, but then that transfer of learning, which
yeah,
is so important. How are you going to apply this? How are you going to use this? And we don't even have to go through it in the class, but I want to put those questions up. How does this apply to you? How are you going to use it? How could you use it tomorrow? What more do you want to know about it? Right. And to be able to have those folks write out those things, and then do the evaluations. And maybe I've seen some of those on the evaluations. Yeah, I wanted to learn more about this, but just making sure that people, it's just with adult learning theory, right? Which is different than how we were taught as kids. We were taught as kids by people lecturing us and telling us what we need to do and how to do it and the parameters, as opposed to adult learning theory, which is people want to be involved in their own learning. They want to use their expertise and apply it to what it is we're talking about,
Yeah.
right? So, how do we make sure people are engaged and they're collaborative in the learning so they're not just being talked at, which some people, it's kind of weird that they're being asked to participate because they're used to, how they learned in elementary school, junior high, high school, maybe college, where it's just lectures. But, the best classes I ever had were the ones where we worked together in smaller groups and talked about how these things apply, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely an important piece. And that's something I've learned as I've gone along. I have less content in my classes now, right? And, and my slide decks used to be so dense. And so recognizing that I don't need so many slides, I don't need so many topics, that there's other classes that have those topics that we can revisit maybe next year. That way I'm not just going through stuff and just giving you lectures. I remember I looked at my first handout, Tiff, for a class, a full day class I did in Alameda County. It was 110 pages. And and it just because I was just trying to dump all my knowledge. Here's what I know. Here's what I know about case management. And so I was running through it,
Yeah.
and
And people don't get anything out of it. That's the
mhm,
thing. When was Nora called a data dump? If you're just doing a data dump, like people will find a couple things interesting, like that was cool, but then when it comes to like doing something different, probably not because it's just too much information. And that's like one of the challenges I have when like classes are too theoretical. Like you can
yeah,
have great models, you can have great models, you can have great theories. And it's sometimes cool to know about them, but if there's not any connection to how does this apply to me, or how does this apply to my work, or how does this apply to my life, then it's like cool information, bro, and it's gone.
yeah.
So that's like where I try to be really intentional of trying to make that connection. Like here's some information, and yeah, it looks cool on this chart, but what does this look like for you? Or like think of an example where you've noticed this, or you know, as a human being, where does this show up in your life? And that to me is where the real growth happens, and where we become ripplelicious. Remember, I'm going to make that a word. Ripplelicious.
Champipplelicious, Champipple,
Champipplelicious. Yeah. So
Champipplelicious.
so when people can really like own it for themselves, and again, this is as a trainer, this is like the high I'm looking for, when people are like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense now. Okay, now they start putting dots together and seeing like a pathway. That's where I'm like, yes, okay, good, that resonated. um and I get excited. Although I want to just say transfer of learning, before I get to my transfer of learning, I will say that one of the things I really try to do as a trainer, though, especially in person, is I try to set a whole vibe. So I don't pass out handouts, by the way. I usually have a table. It like if there's some counties like Bakersfield or Kern County that they do it for you, so that everything's already set up when you get there. Ventura, I think, does the same. There's a few like places where it's all whatever. Um, but usually for me, I set up just a table and I tell people to get it as they come in. And I always say, I practice self-sufficiency, so get your own stuff. And we kind of like joke about that. But I also carry like this little teeny tiny speaker, Bluetooth speaker that I always have an epic playlist on. So as people walk in, there's music, and a lot of times they're like, oh, I haven't heard this song in a long time. And oh, I just always have to make sure I turn off my explicit lyrics because I'm questionable, keeping it real. But I turn off my explicit lyrics so they're all very work appropriate music. Um, and so I have music on. I always walk around and talk to people as they get settled in. Um, I am like opposite of you. I'm really good at just starting conversations. So much so people
Mhm.
will eat my chips at restaurants, but that's another story. Um,
But eat your husband's chips at restaurants.
she, ah, conflict resolution. I tell you, I've grown so much. Um, but yeah, I just really try to set the tone that this is going to be a really relaxing experience. And so even in like my intro, I talk about the topic. I usually like set like you're all grown-ups, take care of yourself. If you gotta go, go take your calls. Just know if you walk right here, I can still hear you and I'm nosy. So, like I try to just really set a light tone for the training. And I purposely never ask them to talk about their job titles. I do not ever say like share who you are, what your job title is. I might say, what department do you represent? What's your program? But I never ask about job titles. And that's because everybody's equal in my training room.
Mhm.
Everybody's equal. And so I don't want people like, I'm a manager and I'm a this and who cares? You're a learner today. We're all
Yeah.
learners. We're all learning together. So very egalitarian, easygoing like type of system. So that's kind of like my vibe. And then I use humor throughout my training, even for serious topics. I try to keep it again. I'm not tone deaf, so I keep it appropriate for the topic. There's some topic like it's going to be really hard to find something cute to say about domestic violence and stuff. So again, I keep it appropriate for the class, but um, part of that, again, the vibe is at the end of every class. This is my transfer of learning. I always tell people before you can go, I need a high five. And so I need five people to share something that you're taking away from today that you can promise to practice in your life, whatever that is. And so, depending on how much time I have, sometimes I have them talk about it with as a group first, and then have a volunteer. Or if I'm running out of time, I'll be just like, give me a quick high five. And so I said, when I get five good ones, I'll give you air high five and spirit fingers. Because that's, I don't know what it is. It came up one day, and so now everybody's waiting for their spirit fingers at the end of the day. And that's just a really like for me a really dope way to kind of end the day. Like let's think about everything we've talked about today and what can you take away? One thing that you're taking away and that you can promise to practice. And so if I have a series, which a lot of times I do, and I by the way, I really prefer series versus one-offs. Can I just be honest with you?
Mhm.
100% would do series is over one-offs, and only because you develop relationships and you get to follow up, and that's like one of my favorite parts.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing a series, we did our high five, people write it down, and then when we come back, that's always the first question I ask. What did you promise to practice? What have you done? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And if you didn't keep your promise to practice, what got in the way? What are you willing to do different? So I always put them in that space of you can own up to not doing it because I again practice what I preach. You can own up that you forgot you're a human being and make a plan to do it better the next time around. So that's really kind of like my perspective on training is that I want people to have a good experience. I want them to learn stuff. I want them to not feel stressed. Um, and I want them to walk out like really feeling like they spent their time, even if it's just to say, you know what, maybe I knew everything that she taught me already, but that was a good day away from my desk, and I'm glad I came. That's what I'm going for. And by the way, that doesn't always happen. Ugh, I've heard some people are like, "Oh my gosh, what a waste of taxpayer money." I've heard that one before.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Like
Yeah.
knowing you're a waste of money, that's a great one. Um, you just want us to be robots when I'm talking about like regulating emotion. Like, no, I don't want you to be a robot. I want you to feel your emotions and do it in a healthy way. But if that means that so you're my target audience,
Yeah.
you didn't catch it this time, but maybe I'll get you next time. That's kind of like how, but I mean, I do reflect. I get all of those comments and I'm really grateful. I'll just come with some gratitude. I really get a lot of great feedback. And it's not always on the performance evaluations. A lot of times people will come up to me and like, I needed to hear this today. I'm going to go home and have a conversation. Or, you know what, thank you for sharing it from this perspective. You made me really think about it in a different way. That's like the stuff that keeps me ripplelicious. I got a text. earlier this year. We'll just call it that because I want to honor it. Just they texted me because I had a my phone number out there and was like, "You have no idea. Like, you might have saved my marriage, and I just really appreciate all the work that you do for us." And I just was like, "My God, like that it's worth all the travel and all the stuff. Like that's those are the moments that I'm shooting for.
Right.
Those are the moments. If you do better at work, even better. But if you just do better in life, then I feel like, my whole live your best life. That's my whole brand. That's my whole essence of who I am. Is just live your best life, whatever that looks like for you. So when people come back and say my life is better, I'm getting to my best life, smoke a fake cigarette. I'm vibing. That's exactly what I want. And for people who like, I hate your guts, I hope you die. And I'm like, you know what? Ditto. I work with the willing. Work with the willing. Thank you so much for sharing your hatred with me, and I wish you well. I wish you well.
Well, that's something. I mean, you're always going to have one or two people. I tell people straight up, there's
Oh
a
yeah.
couple of you
Oh
here
yeah.
who are not going to feel me at all. And or
Right.
maybe you're you've, hey, look, I've done this and you say all these things and I've heard this all before and it's just not registering. I mean, that's cool. I don't, I'm not for everybody,
Yeah.
right? My flavor ain't for everybody. Some people, you
Right.
know, want, want something else. That's not who I am. I get it. But, you know,
Yeah.
it's how do I reach people in a profound, meaningful way that are open to it, right?
Right.
And just the feedback you get and like you said, those the words that are shared and counties asking you for more class, those are the things that really matter to me.
Mhm.
I mean, if it was up to me, we would do more than just the level one smile sheets, right? And but some of
Right.
the things, I had somebody in Ventura County the other day say, one of my problems with these classes is that you guys teach us all this stuff, but then it doesn't really we don't really learn how to do it. And so I said, okay, so what is it that you want? So she talked about it. I said, okay, so what would you say? And I took her to, just 5 minutes of coaching questions on our break. And she's like, oh, that really helped. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And so she came up with her own answer,
Mhm.
which is really like we've talked about with coaching,
Right.
people have the answers to their own problems most of the
Yeah.
time. They just aren't always given the platform and the ability to really think them through and to come up with those. And the more that they come up with them, the more they're invested and the more that they, are dedicated to addressing those issues rather than someone telling them, you need to do this, right? So, that's definitely an important thing. Like you said, when you end with the high five, I start with questions, three questions that are sometimes related to the overall topic. Sometimes they're related to, sometimes I'll just say, what's your favorite annual event or your favorite holiday? What's a TV show or a movie that when it comes on TV, you just have to stop everything and you watch that? It's like, oh, well, I was looking for something else, but Shawshank Redemption's on. I guess that's what I'm doing this afternoon, right? Or just those little things like that. But then also, like in a wellness class, also, where do you like to recharge your battery? What's your favorite comfort food, right? And those emotional intelligence classes, what's a lesson you learned at a young age that still applies today? What motivates you to get to work on time, right? So those things, can, and people don't like icebreakers. I mean, I guess, you know, I mean, in where they are at the beginning of the class, they're technically icebreakers, but they're not, hi, say who you are and where you're from. Like you said, I don't do that, and I'm not interested in that. People will generally let us know who they are as they go along. Or like if you're in Tulare County, you get to see their actual job titles, right? So, but just to be able to start a dialogue at the tables. I know some people mix up people all the time. For me, because a lot of our folks, especially eligibility folks, tend to be a little more introverted. The more that they talk with each other at the tables, the more that they will share. So I try not to mix up too many groups unless I see some groups that are just not clicking, or the entire group is great, so we can mix them up. I will have a couple activities like that, but most of my activities, I want the same group, whether it's virtual or in person. If it's in person, they stay at their tables. If it's virtual, I don't mix up the breakout rooms because I just want them to feel more comfortable with each other. The more comfortable they are, the more that they'll share personal stuff. And those, like you said, those questions, talk about a time where you failed. Talk about a time that you had a difficult situation. How much of it was the client? How much of it was you? If you could go back and change something, what would you do? Those are conversations that generally happen as you get to know somebody because I mean, people don't usually share their personal shit with each other until they actually get to know each other. So, yeah, I just had that happen this last week. I was in a class where two people were in the class because they had a conflict and they worked together. And so they didn't realize that, but a lot of the class and the stories I was telling were directed to their dynamic, right? And by the end of the class, one of them was looking at the other and said, "Yeah, we were both in this class. Do you remember? Do you remember?" And she was actually talking to this person, and they don't talk, right? And it was right across, it was across the room, and so it was like, sometimes people don't realize the intention. It wasn't my intention until I got there. The staff development person told me, like, as the first, activity was, well, I'm sitting with somebody who they're a little uncomfortable because they're actually here mandatorily because there's somebody else in the room. I said, okay, cool. Thanks. Thanks for letting me know. Perfect. Now I have a game plan, right? So whatever I'm talking about topics, how do I mix this in to make this relevant to the situation they're both experiencing? And I guess it worked because they were, communicating and actually were part of a group at the end of the class. So it was super rewarding, right? Just to see sometimes the
Awesome.
nonverbal, but visceral effectiveness of what it is that we're trying to do. So yeah, those things are the best, and that's what makes the travel worth it. That's what makes me, gives me a high as I'm leaving, and driving 3 hours to check into another hotel and hoping I get a king bed instead of two queens, right? And asking for the
Hate two
upgrade.
queen rooms. Hate two
Yeah,
queen rooms.
not a fan, right? So, but yeah,
Yeah. I was thinking about icebreakers too. If I go to a training and they're like, let's go around the room and I like name a fun fact, I'm like, get the F. I'm already pissed off from the beginning. So I don't like those. I don't think they're effective. There's one
yeah,
thing about like preferences, but I'm always looking at outcome. I don't think they really result in what you want people to do or what the goal is. So I
yeah,
usually do a mixer. Again, this is me setting the vibe. I say,
hmm
I let people sit where they want. I let people do what they want. Um, and so I usually am like, in the beginning at least, because almost every class of mine has some level of communication and cooperation as part of like the theme of it. It's just something that's important to me. So I invite them to go meet somebody else. So we're not going to go around the room and say each other's names and whatever, but I do want you to get to know each other. So I'm going to put some music on and let you all just mingle, talk to each other. I expect you meet one new person. And I always make the joke, and if you live by hashtag no new friends and you don't want to talk to anybody, stay where you're at, they'll come to you. And I just kind of let them go on their own and I watch them like and usually and there's a question in there too, like if you don't know what to talk about this. And so at the end, and I always like pay attention to the volume because everybody's like super loud. And then as they come back, I'm like, okay, what did you notice? Did you raise your hand if you met one new person? And everybody raised their hand, or most people raised their hand. And then, what'd you notice about the energy level in here? Did you hear how loud it was? Could you even hear what song was playing? Most people are like, oh, you had music on. I said I had very loud music on, but you couldn't hear it because everybody was talking to each other. So I kind of debrief like that. And then I kind of ask them, like, do you see, like, it's, again, most of my stuff is about making changes and doing things different. Said, I took a chance here because almost every training I've gone to is the obligatory go around the room, blah, blah, blah. But nobody likes it. We're not enjoying it. Somebody always goes too far with their fun fact. I said, but if the goal is for us to meet people and to talk to each other, this worked out really well. And so this is just proof that just because something's always been done a certain way doesn't mean you can't try something different. And if my goal was for you to meet each other, did we meet that goal? Everybody's like, yeah. And said, was it a little bit less intimidating? Yeah. It could have failed. Everybody could have stayed at their seat and just stared off into the sunset. That was an option, but that's not what happened. And if that would have happened, I would have pivoted and tried something else. And so this is an invitation to be open to trying something different. Even maybe you've been doing it your whole life. If it still works for you and you're getting the results you want, then it's working. Don't change anything. But if it's not working, this is a great time to think about something else. And so I really
right.
kind of, again, setting the tone, setting the vibe.
Yeah.
and you have a choice. So with groups, I don't mix groups up either in person, but I do say if you want a different perspective, feel free to move around. So I
Yeah.
allow them, like, if you want to get a different perspective, feel free to move around. And some people do. I actually do see some people who
Mhm.
table hop, which I think is really, really amazing, but it also leaves the people who don't want to, they can stay in their little bubble of safety.
Yeah.
Um, in classrooms, in virtual, I think it depends on the county or the class or if it's mixed. And so I do try to do half day, half day. At lunchtime, I usually shake up the breakout rooms.
Yeah.
But I also tell people they're not a hostage to their breakout room. So if you're in a breakout room and you're not vibing there, and those are the words I use. I'm very professional. If you're not vibing in your breakout room and maybe they're not as talkative as you would prefer, or they're too talkative and you would need something a little slower, you can come out and leave and I'll reassign you. If you have a
Yeah.
person that you really want to talk with and you want to be in their group, I can move you around. If you have someone that you're absolutely not, I can't be with this person, let me know and I'll move you. There, no questions asked.
Well,
And so
that's
I
that's
think,
one of yeah.
yeah,
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I should say people take advantage of that. Some people are like, you
Yeah.
know what, this is too quiet. Nobody's talking. Can you move me? I got a room for you, you know.
Yeah.
And the people who don't talk to each other in breakout rooms, by the way, for those of you who do virtual training, we know. We can see.
That's what I was gonna say. Zoom is real cool. If you guys don't realize this, okay, this is behind the curtain, right? But we get to see. Oh, well, as long as the programmer sets it up right, we get to see if you're talking or if somebody in your room is talking. When you go into breakout rooms, your audio and your video is on, right? Or if it's on or if
Yeah.
it's off. So we can see what rooms are talking and what rooms aren't. And so, if I have a couple rooms that maybe are just finishing real quick or not really talking, then I will switch up the rooms, right? But
Yeah.
if it's a good mix, then I just let it happen organically. In person, I'm kind of like you. Well, I'll do half to the first in the morning, we stay in our spaces, but then in the afternoon, I have an activity that where we line up based off our birthdays, blah blah blah, and then that becomes our triad.
Yeah.
And that, or if we work in threes or twos, and there's uneven, if there's five people at a table and four at another, hey, so could one person at this table join the other two here? And by
Right.
that time in the afternoon, it's much more um, they're much more willing to do so. When I ask
Yeah.
them, because I'm not making people, okay, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, no, we're not doing that. This ain't seventh grade. But if I say, if you wouldn't mind joining a threesome, and we have some foursomes that stay threesomes, some tables that are six,
Yeah.
they end up sharing the table. And if they're comfortable doing that, cool. But usually
Leave
we'll see
alone.
more people. It's organic, right? I'm not trying to put people in negative situations. And my questions at the beginning are always tied to conversations about what we're going to have as we're going along. And then maybe just one non sequitur that where you learn more about that person, which creates that more of organic conversation. And then the debrief afterwards, who's traveled the furthest away from home, right? And then people on the break, they'll come up, wow, you went to Peru or you went to Australia? Wow, so that kind of, for me, it happens organically. Being an introvert, I don't want someone to tell me I have to talk to somebody else. I'd rather feel comfortable talking to somebody else. And if someone's making me do it, I might be a little hesitant. So I try to honor those because introverts never get honored. It's always an extroverted world. It's always, if there's two or three people in a class that are speaking up, we usually let those people speak up. Well, I know a lot of folks are introverts, especially folks who do office work. So I want to elevate them and honor them and give them the opportunity to feel comfortable so that they feel
Yeah.
like this is relevant to them as well. So yeah, gosh, I was worried we are going to be short on time, but we've already gone over our time. But
I know. I could keep talking about this stuff all day. I love training. I love like talking about creating these environments. I love connecting the human experience to processes and um, systems, like it's a big deal. And I don't, I say this with like all the humility of the universe, that it's really hard sometimes to find people who are good at both understanding like systems and policies and can train effectively.
yeah,
And I think that's like one of the ways that that I've been able to be successful is that I'm good at training, but I also understand the systems and the processes and the people part of it too. Um,
Yeah. And
and
just understanding the
I think that's why
language.
I find so much
Yeah.
passion here. Yeah.
Yeah. Just
But
understanding the
it's
language. If you can tell stories that are relatable, but also learn a bit of the lingo. If you're working like with child welfare, I never worked in child welfare, but I did work with some child welfare cases. But as I got more comfortable, I understood more of the language that they're talking about and more of the, what it is that they do and how they do it and what it's called. So and then I tell stories from other people. That's the great thing about getting other people's perspectives. I tell people, I'm going to steal that and use that in another class if you don't mind, right? So they're not just hearing from me because that's another thing. Well, you never worked in this, right? But I did train somebody who in Marin County that worked here and was telling me this story. How does that relate to you, right? And so people are looking for two different things, right? Different in terms of credibility. They're looking for intellectual credibility. Do you know what you're talking about? Do you know where you're getting your sources from? How long you've been in the business? What can you tell me that relates, right? And then people are looking for personal credibility, which is, yeah, you know all the bells and whistles and all the lingo, but do you know how to communicate that to somebody in a way that really means something to that
right.
person and rings true? And so if we can marry those two, that's what to me, that's what makes a master trainer, right? It's not about
Hmm.
do you know all the regs? Great. Someone who reads all county letters all the time can know the regs. It doesn't mean that they're going to be a great trainer. Master trainer is somebody who can, like you mentioned, take the topics and meld them into ways to relate to each other on a personal level. And so every single person who leaves feels like they got something out of it personally. And that's when I can, leave feeling like a job well done. So I hear
Yeah.
you.
Same.
So you got some hot tips? You got some hot tips for us, Tiff?
Be Ripplicious. Or what was that? Shamboogie?
Champimplelicious.
Champipplelicious. No.
Yes.
I will say with training, this is since kind of that was the topic of the day today. Prepare in whatever way makes sense for you. So if that means
Hmm.
having like notes and a great uh, luxurious outline and that works well for you, then do that. And if it doesn't work well for you, then don't do that. Find what works for you. I also will say, like, know what your end goal is so that you can develop your training around those end goals and try to keep it simple. You can't do too much too fast. So I would say like 2 to 3 main ideas per topic. Um, like for a day, like a day. I would say more than 2 or 3 is probably overwhelm. Um, be real intentional about how you're going to include the audience in their own learning, whether it be through reflection questions, activities, exercises, case studies. Um, keep in mind your introverts and how they participate. Sometimes they just want to be a good listener, and sometimes they've got something to say. So how do you mix all of that in? And I would say for my own personal experience, set a vibe. Like let people know like right away what they can expect, and keep it light. Training doesn't have to be intense. I mean, it can be, and sometimes it needs to be, but it doesn't have to be. So help people learn, keep the environment cool. Keep it chill. It's not that
Cool.
serious.
Cool. Those are good hot tips. So I'm gonna play
And
off
be
that with
delicious.
yeah. So I'm gonna play off that with a couple of doctor's orders, right? So like you mentioned, different people have different ways of coming at training. Get in where you fit in, where you feel most comfortable, right? Um, if your goal is to make sure that you get through all of your content, rethink your goal to think about what would I like people to leave with, because there's sometimes where the content is not going to be as relevant as something that comes up during the class. You may have to go left, but if you don't get through all of the content, but they still have an idea of what it was you were trying to communicate to them, job well done, right? Because sometimes conversations will overtake that, right? Keep it moving. All right. So the best way to keep it moving is to keep people engaged and involved, have them talk about this stuff, and also make sure you take breaks on time, right?
Oh yeah.
You know, no more than an hour and 10 hour and 20 minutes before you take a break. Give people a chance to think about, you know, to their brain a chance to rest. They sit there too long, it's gonna kill it. And like you said, keep it real, right? How does this apply to you? We're not in school, right? No one's going to be tested on this. The test is going to come the next day when you're talking with your client or with your coworkers or with your direct reports, right, or in that interview. That's when the test is. So you want to make sure people are prepared for the test. And so that's that's it. That's the magic potion, Miss
And
Tiff.
for good measure, and for good measure, don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole, please.
I
And
mean, this has just been one of our hot tips, and I'm just saying, let's go with it. It fits here too, because can I tell you, if you come in very arrogant, if you come in like I know this and I'm going to teach you something, good luck to you and Godspeed, because you're probably not going to achieve any of that.
yep,
People won't be open to it. So,
yep,
um, Ray Weaver, he said something once that I thought was pretty cool, and he was like treat training like a chicken wing. Eat the meat, throw out the bone. Like take from it what you want and throw out the rest. And I
yeah,
really kind of resonate with that because, you know, I know we're going to wrap up here, but I don't really my goal when I train is not to get through to everybody because I know that that's impossible. And so I always say if one person takes one thing away from today that makes their life better, then I did a good job. I always say you keep the bar low and you're never disappointed. And so I achieve my goal almost every time. I can see that one person got one thing and they take it away. And if that was my impact, then I did a good job and I'm okay with it.
yeah.
So that's
I
what
have a
keeps me.
similar one. I have a
Yeah.
similar one. I tell people if you have one thing that you can take away that either
Hmm.
confirms what you do or helps you look at it in a different way or teaches you something different, then cool. That's all I'm here for. So,
Yeah.
and that's
Yep.
all we're here for is to help you guys.
That's
So hopefully you took something away from us. Let us know. You can always comment. Let us know what's going on. We have our reels and our shorts now that we'll put up on our socials. And so let us know if anything stands out to you. If you want us to talk about any topics, I mean, if you have any questions, we can do a question and answer, session or whatever else it is. Just holla. We're flexible and we'll be there.
all.
And so until then, I'm Carl.
I'm Tiff, and I'm about to be Missy Elliott because you made me just I know what to put on my playlist right
Holla,
now. Dun, 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 dun. So I'm gonna say
champ
keep it
people.
real. Yep. Keep it
Keep it,
real, everybody. Keep it
keep it
real.
Champipplelicious, y'all. All right.
Keep it ripalicious.